People who've been very capable in life very much identify as being self-reliant and strong. It's hard for them to say that they're at that point of overwhelm.
Maybe they call it ambition or drive, but now all of a sudden it's like something's flipped.
Capability can be a cage. Their nervous system connects safety to this level of pleasing, producing, and performing. They actually feel safer in the fight or flight.
I have everything looks good, I shouldn't be feeling this way, and yet I'm struggling.
Coping is different than calming. It's not that they can't do it, it's that they can't not do it. If you're trying to garden in a flash flood, it doesn't take root.
Hi, welcome. Today I am with Rochelle Walsh. She's a Christian therapist with decades of clinical training who combines neuroscience-based strategies with principles of the Christian faith to help thousands of women experience inside-out calm. This deep core change allows them to live with joy and presence, fully stepping into who God created them to be. Thanks for being here, Rochelle.
Thank you, Jim.
Super excited to have you. Let's dive in and talk all things overwhelm, burnout, and just like the stress and tension that women in particular are carrying these days.
Right. Well, and women are carrying a great deal of stress. I mean, burnout 1.5 times more likely than their male counterparts. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around stress, and people think it's a capacity issue or it's a work-life balance issue, when really it's something much deeper.
One of the things, so I've been an acupuncturist for 20 years, been in the health and wellness world for over 25. And so one of the things that I've seen over and over again is this kind of disconnect between what people know intellectually versus what they feel, and the conflict and that inner turmoil that creates. I imagine you must see that a lot with the women you work with. Absolutely.
It's not only confusion, because I know all the right things, I believe all the right things, I've read the right things, I know how to think about it intellectually. So there's confusion about why it doesn't feel true to me. So there's confusion. And then I find that there's also a lot of shame about that. Oftentimes, women are often afraid to admit that they're feeling so overwhelmed because they think it reflects something negatively about their faith, or that they just can't handle things as well as others. So I think there's confusion, and I think there's, like I said, shame, and oftentimes an identity crisis, because people who've been very capable in life, very high achieving, very much identify as being self-reliant and strong. It's hard for them to say that they're at that point of overwhelm.
Especially when everything looks pretty good from the outside, right? For people that, I saw this with my clients, especially when I was in Miami, where, everyone's living the nice life down there, and everything looks good on the outside, but how they feel, it's they're two totally different things. And that guilt and that shame of just I have everything looks good, I shouldn't be feeling this way, and yet I'm struggling.
Right. Just the incongruence with that I don't understand. That's what I hear a lot. I don't understand. I have everything that I could want. They're grateful. They're grateful for their careers, their families, their faith, and yet they have this inner turmoil. And the incongruence of that's really distressing. And I think one of the things that's really important for them to know is that it's two different operating systems, two different parts of the brain. And so mind renewal, or, using the way you think about things and your thoughts, that's effective and good intentioned. But it's if you're trying to garden in a flash flood, it doesn't take root until there's a change in that deeper automatic operating system. And so things can look good on the outside and they're holding it together, but internally, the unrest is really taxing on the body. And I'm sure as an acupuncturist, you've seen that, how emotional and mental distress shows up in the body.
For sure. And one of the things that I used to always love about acupuncture was its ability to sort of bypass the logical mind, right? And it's just the needles do their thing, and it would introduce sometimes a feeling of relaxation that people hadn't felt maybe in a long, long time or ever. And it was this is it's you get a new baseline, right? It gives them sort of a new touch point. But moving, it's when I've heard you talk about your work, it's that moving beyond the logical mind to get to those deeper levels, right? It's like you're so much more nuanced to it. Because like with the needles, it's like people are like really passive and they're just get to lay there, right? Which is like cool for a little while, but then at some point, like they don't really have the skills to navigate when, you know, life gets a little weird or you know, when the kids are stressed and the husband's stressed and everything's kind of getting wonky. And I know that your work is so much more focused on that sort of long-term sustainable, like let's give you the new skill set or upgrade the operating system.
Absolutely. Like I always say, coping is different than calming. So there's so much on how to get down from a trigger or, you know, go in a cold plunge or do something to temporarily change your state. But that's not true calming. And I think what you said just a minute ago was key when you said some of them feel a level of relaxation that maybe they've never felt before. And that's what a lot of, I think people don't realize because their nervous system has been habituated to a state of hypervigilance. So early on, their nervous system learned to feel safe when they were in control, when they were over-functioning, when they were pleasing, performing, producing. And so it's who I've always been. And so when they try to do things that they've been taught to do, whether that's, you know, breath work or, you know, forms of, you know, Christian aligned, even meditation, there's such a restlessness that comes up when they try to be still because their nervous system has habituated and it connects safety to this level of pleasing, producing, and performing. And so then they say those things don't work for me because they actually feel safer in the fight or flight or more familiar in the fight or flight. But over time, it's become taxing and they say, I can no longer handle all the things I used to be able to handle.
And that's like the tipping point, right? I sort of see it as there's people that have kind of had like anxiety forever. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my experience that there's people that sort of have anxiety for a long, long time. And then there's like, seems to be this other group of people that maybe they also had anxiety for a long time, but they didn't really call it that. Maybe they called it ambition or drive. But now all of a sudden it's like something's flipped, whether it's, you know, hormones or age or life and whatever it might be. But now all of a sudden these like the feelings of anxiety they feel like they've come from nowhere, but maybe it's just been a slower build.
I think I love what you're saying there because first of all, I think it's a problem with the way we approach mental health because people say, I just have always had anxiety. And they hate it when people feel confined by a label because I don't think that has to be true for anybody. I think that broken brain model is incredibly disempowering. But to your point, a lot of people have been living in that hypervigilance, but they will say, I never had anxiety until this thing happened or that thing happened. And it does oftentimes happen around times in life where they might be having hormonal shifts. And so they correlate it to, I think it's just perimenopause or menopause. And it's like, well, there are some things because cortisol impacts hormones and that can make it more intense. It can also be things that are happening in that season of life, kids going off to college, things getting a little bit quieter, and the fact that your body has been in that state of fight or flight for so long. And so, yes, they don't identify, but their baseline has been one of hypervigilance. And so it's just felt normal. And so that's ambitious, the one that carries it all, the one that everybody responds, or relies on rather, being able to have a high capacity. I can never sit still, go type A. And so getting them to recognize that we don't have to pathologize that, but they also don't have to be living in an outdated method of survival or fight or flight. They can update that system and habituate to a new level of calm.
So just to make sure I'm understanding this right. So like the nervous system is there to keep you safe, right? So there's kind of like two nervous systems. We got the resting relaxation mode, and then we've got the fight, flight, now they say freeze also.
Right.
And so all of that's there to like the fight, flight, freeze is to help you survive. And so what you're saying is that women oftentimes will fall, you mentioned there were 3 Ps, I think I heard, right?
Yeah.
And all of that is different ways that they have adapted to survive. Can we talk about, can we break down each of those Ps?
Right. And it doesn't have to be something that they would consider a big T trauma, although many people have had those, but it's kind of like early on when our nervous system is learning, who am I? Where do I fit into this system? What's been modeled for me? Scripturally it says, do not be conformed by the world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. We've all been conformed by the world. We all are just open when we come into our systems. And so they might have, based on their position in the family, what was going on with parents around them, figured out, how do I best look outside of myself, hypervigilance, rather than being attuned to what's going on, or maybe no one reflecting back to me and helping me make sense of my experiences. How do I relieve the stress in the family? How do I get approval? How do I help others? And so sometimes people, it's, approval. I can please other people. I can make everybody happy. And if everybody else around me is happy, I'm okay. Pleasing. Sometimes it can be performance. I'm kind of the family hero and I'm a straight A student, and as much as I can do, that makes things easier. And then producing, if I am doing something, I have worth or safety. And these are just a few examples. There's of course many more, but early on we're learning, our nervous system is learning what I do to help keep me safe. And then that forms habits. And so I'll tell people that's not your unique design. Now there's some amazing resiliencies that have come through that. So it's not a bad thing, but they can still perform. They can still be pleasing. They can still produce, but from a place of purpose rather than pressure. And I think that's really the difference in that.
Yeah, I love that. It's for me, it's like you can still do the things, but the way that you do them is totally different. Like I grew up in that similar kind of like high achieving household. The message that I heard growing up was like, you have to get straight A's. It was always like the Ivy League conversation as far as college. Like if you're not in the Ivy League, like you didn't really try hard enough and you weren't good. I get a 96 or a 97 on a test and my dad would be like, why wasn't it 100? And he wasn't being a jerk about it, but it was just like, what happened there, right? And so I started telling myself all these stories about being a high achiever. And it was only later on that as I started doing some of that interpersonal work that I was like, oh, like I need to reevaluate what I'm doing here, because that sort of drive, it was like, I guess on some level it was like, well, the more I achieve, then then on some level, like I'm okay, right? Whether it's like trying to get that approval or just like, I'm okay. But then at some point there's a tipping point. At some point, for me, there was a reckoning where it's like, I have to be okay just being me. Like if everything is tied to achievement, then I can never really rest and relax. It's like there's always, no matter what I'm doing, there's always a leak in my energetic bucket. Like I can never be full because there's always this other sort of like external thing that I'm trying to achieve or accomplish or get from somebody else.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Absolutely. And isn't it interesting? I don't know what your tipping point was, but when you said like you had to go back and reevaluate the stories, the meanings that you attach to that, because yes, you heard those from your parents, but I think what people also don't recognize is that those automatic stories and thoughts and beliefs about our identity, so I have to be perfect, I have to always be achieving, is that your little boy brain, right, without any understanding of anything, just heard that and then made a decision, came to a conclusion that you didn't have the ability as a child to evaluate or have any context for. And so I don't know how old you were. How old were you when you came to that place where you started to recognize like some of those stories and some of those operating rules may not fit how I see and what I've come to believe now as an adult?
Yeah, it was, for me, it was like, I'm 46 now. So it was probably when I was like in my mid 30s. Actually, I heard like the like, one of the ultimate tipping points was when I was getting divorced. It was the conversation to where we decided to split, where I realized I married my father basically, where I was like in that I felt like she, unconsciously perhaps was like leveraging my desire to self-improve and my desire to like do more, be better. And I just found myself in that same cycle as like I felt like I did when I was a kid, of just like, got to get the straight A's, I got to get the things. I was checking my backpack, hyper vigilant, like, do I have all my schoolwork? I can't get, it's like everything's got to be there. if I'd seen the therapist back in the day, they probably would have said, anxiety, right? But for me, I was just like, oh, this is just like what you have to do to achieve. And then I remember we were like having this conversation to separate. And I was like, we can go to therapy and we can like, talk through this and whatever. And she was like, I don't need to go to therapy, but you can. And I was like, yeah, this is like, I'm choosing to get off of the treadmill of like continuing to morph myself to try to like give you what you want. You know what I mean? It was this like aha moment. And like, I did therapy afterwards, which is great, but it's like, there was that thing of like, what's the driver here? Right. And it was sort of the shifting of like trying to do something for other people versus like, what is it that I want? And I don't think I'd ever really asked myself that question in a profound kind of quiet way.
Yeah. And that's, I think, a lot, for a lot of women that I see, they recognize that, like you were saying, that familiar angst.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't always know that it can be something that changes. But it is true that if we don't kind of change that operating system, we are going to seek out similar feeling states, even if they're not desirable to us. The woman that I help oftentimes will say, it's hard for me to even sit and watch a movie or watch TV. I just want to be able to be there, or they're, but that feeling of I have to be performing or I have to be productive to feel like I'm worthy, or I feel guilty if I'm resting.
Uh-huh.
You're saying your wife, the interaction with her stirred that same feeling. And I think it's important to understand that if you hadn't made those changes within yourself, you might have experienced that same dynamic in another relationship or in the way you approached work. And so for women to understand that they might not be able to control what's going on directly in their marriage or, with relationships or in their workload, but just making those shifts internally can give them so much relief from that state of I have to always be doing more and it's not okay to rest.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Like what I've come to find out, and like I would, it's like I'm not happy that we got divorced. Like I'm not like, it's not no one gets married thinking like that's the road.
Right.
But if I could go back in time, if I could like wave the magic wand and give younger version of me something, it would be that feeling of safety in the body. Like, and that's why I love your work and like focusing on the nervous system and talking about that, because when I look back at it now, I had such a profound feeling of being unsafe that it was like, how do you create a great life from that place? It's like everything just feels frantic. Like, we had a little baby. It was like, I was the clinic in 2 different cities. Like it was a lot, right? And it was just like, I was running and thinking, I was like, I'm doing what I got to do to provide and like, be the caregiver and, like provide for the family. And just like, it was years later that through doing, this kind of having conversations like this and doing this work where I was like, oh, it was like 3 or 4 years later that I was like, oh, I never really felt safe in my body.
Right.
And it was like this process of separating out like the people pleasing and the overachieving with just like being okay. So I was being okay with like it being messy.
Right. I think that's a good point, because so many times it's like the busyness, they're all good things. Like they may be performing in their career that they feel called to, doing things for their family who they love, being, sacrificial and as Christian of a high value on, right, do for others. And so they're doing good things. And so it's hard to step back sometimes. And so that knowing that rest isn't just a suggestion, like from a Christian perspective, it is, be still and know that I'm God, and the Sabbath. And I'm just assuming that those were commandments because God knew we would have a hard time doing it on our own. But when you're saying like, if I could go back, so many women that I talk to, some of those aha moments are when they start to see their kids demonstrating some of the same tendencies. Maybe they have anxiety or, and they recognize that and they desperately want to not pass it on. And they're very concerned about what can I do for my kids? They might be grown kids, like teenagers and parents and, parents themselves. And I'll tell them, like, it's a 2-for-1 if you do it for you, because your kids really, I mean, at an early age, depend on that co-regulation. But even throughout life, they look to you. And so when you're saying, when I recognize I never felt safe, like, how much would it have changed for you if your father had been able to, he probably, carried some of that himself. And so I tell the women, like, it's never selfish to take care of yourself, because even though I want women to be able to be motivated to do it for themselves and to know that it is okay and good and it is not selfish, but to also know it has a profound impact on how you're able to really be present in your relationships with your spouse, with your children. And that really is how people break that generational cycle of that. And so that's super important too. And I think very oftentimes can be a strong motivator for women, because they're still under that belief that's not quite okay to do it for themselves. And then other women, of course, have come to the place where they recognize, like you do, I'm not going to show up in my business, I'm not going to show up in my family, and I'm determined to just be. I'm less of the person that God wants me to be when I'm living in a place of emotional reactivity or burnout or depletion. And so they're really motivated to make that change for themselves. But yes, children are important, and it does definitely filter down through.
Yeah, there's such a mirror, right? And they're like mirrors and sponges. It's so complicated.
I know.
A lot. Listening to you talk, one of the things that I'm thinking about is when it comes to rest, like, that it's, at least my experience was that it's not about like taking a weekend off or like going on vacation. It's a totally different energetic state almost, is what it feels like. And it feels like it's almost like a skill, to like really rest in a way that you're actually replenished. And it doesn't really, for me anyway, it didn't really have much to do with like if my schedule was busy or not. It's like something totally different.
Right. I know for the women I help, it's learning to not do is actually the skill, right? It's not that they can't do it. It's that they can't not do it. And so they can take a sabbatical, they can go on vacation, but it's where their head is. It's where their nervous system is, that really, you can be working from a state of calm and ease, and you can be vacationing from a place of dysregulation. The outside does not change the inside. And so many times, we all naturally think, when I get to that next season, when there's fewer kids' activities, when work slows down, next quarter things are going to be a little bit more manageable. And then you get to that season and you recognize, everywhere I go, there I am. Yeah, it really is from within. And so, but I think that should be a place of, again, encouragement, because we can't control all the things. I mean, we will have trials in this life. And when our nervous system says uncertainty is unsafe, regulation will never happen. That has to happen from within, because we don't know what's coming tomorrow. But we can know that when we get there, God is going to be before us, behind us, with us, and we are going to be able to meet what happens in that moment. But being connected to that requires that we be still, because his voice is not screaming, it's whispering. And so we're...
That's beautiful. Have you ever seen the research on vacation? There was a study I saw a long time ago that showed when people are happiest in regards to their vacation, and it was like 7 days before the vacation actually started, because they got excited, they felt best thinking about going on the vacation. But then once they're on the vacation, they're stuck with who they are and their nervous systems. And so you're dealing with passports and flights and traffic and like all of the stuff that happens on the vacation. And so like the biggest bang for the kind of vacation buck happens a week before the vacation even
That's
happens.
so interesting, because I can think of, just as you're saying, I can think of 3 clients right now. One was on a big vacation and came back and didn't enjoy a minute of it.
Yeah.
And so enrolled in our program. Another one, we just did a recent testimonial video for her, and she said, she filmed it from Maui, and she said, I'm here thanks to you, because she went to Maui regularly, but she said last year she couldn't go because she was too overwhelmed. And then I had another one who actually felt great on vacation and then had a panic attack the night before she came home, because it's like, it doesn't last, right? And so it's probably, I'm guessing from what you're saying, I hadn't read that, that's interesting, but the hopeful expectation right? This is going to make it all,
Yeah.
this is all going to make it better. But then even if it's a great vacation, you come home to reality, and most of us aren't living on a vacation permanently. And so we want to be able to, and that's another thing I think that's super important, is just to, when you're able to make the deeper changes, again, we talked like about the not coping, but really true calming. You don't have to wait to take a vacation from your life. You can build in healthy rhythms of rest and balance that allow you to really be appreciative, grateful, joyful in the everyday moments, and not have to wait until something drastically changes that you can finally rest and get to a place of restoration.
So how does a woman know that like it's time for a change? Like your ideal woman, I'm always interested in like turning points for people. Like what was that? What are some of like the aha moments, or what's going on in the women that you've helped, like your ideal client? What's happened in her life that she's like, I have to reach out now. Like I can't force this.
Yeah. A lot of times her body starts demanding the rest that she can't allow herself. So a lot of our women will say that most of them have a very, as I imagine your clients as well, a focus on natural health. So maybe they've done hormone replacement, they've thought it's hormones, they've done diets, restrictive diets, they've gotten the stress has caused gut permeability, so they've taken supplements, they've done diets, they exercise. And so they've really tried to manage it, but it's no longer working. And so they've done one thing after another, and yet maybe they have high cortisol levels. Maybe they recognize that they're not sleeping well. And, oftentimes they say something has to change. They don't want to quit their jobs. Also, emotional reactivity. They recognize that they're maybe holding it together in public. And so to your point earlier, things look fine on the surface, but when they come home, that irritability, they say, I'm not an angry person, but I feel so angry, or I've never been a crier, but I'm crying. And they don't like the way they're showing up in their families. So they might feel disconnected. They might try to go to the bedroom because I just feel like I don't have the capacity for it anymore. And so oftentimes when they come, they're still functioning, they're still doing things at work, but they're concerned about that because they're not functioning in their personal life the way they want to. And they're concerned about their clarity at work. They're concerned about they've had a business or a job and they enjoy it, and they know they used to enjoy it, but they can't think as clearly as they want to. And they're worried about decreased capacity in that way. And they see it showing up again in their body, in their personal lives, in their spiritual lives. They feel it. And so I think for a lot of our women, self-reliance is something that's held them back a little bit. So they're very educated. They listen to podcasts and they read books. And so again, just helping them understand but they get advisors and help in other areas of their life, helping them understand that it's not a failure to not have been able to figure it out on their own. Yeah. And I think once they can have permission to get the help, that oftentimes is kind of a light bulb for them that it's okay to change something.
I saw this meme the other day of this woman, and she was like trying to carry a couch by herself. And the text said something like, hey, like mom in your 40s, like in case no one's ever told you, extreme independence or extreme self-reliance is a coping strategy.
It should.
And it's like, it was so funny to me because it's, it resonated, it's like, yeah. I'm just like, I'll do it myself, figure it out. Like I'm a third of 4 kids. It was just like, don't make waves and you'll be fine. And so I was just like, I got to figure it out on my own.
Right.
And then, so it's like, no, actually that's a coping strategy. That's not really like that healthy.
It actually is. I mean, capability can be a cage.
Oh, nice.
Right? Like and so, but then when we can say, okay, you don't need to spend time, and I know we've talked about like how this goes back to the past. I think another thing that I've learned that has really shifted for me is I spent decades being a complex trauma therapist, doing EMDR, going back into the past, is to understand that you don't need to go back into the past and rehash your childhood and all those past things. you can really change that imprint. It's the imprint. They've already survived the past, and what they did to get through that or adapt, or who they became in the past, helped them in a good way. And so it's not about, again, finding the dysfunction in it. It's about saying, like, what's the imprint now that you need an updating system? It's not working like it did back then. You don't even need it now. It's an outdated protective conclusion that you came to then, and now you don't need it. And so that capability, you can still be super capable and super resilient. In fact, you get more resilient as you have psychological flexibility and inner capacity. And so but I think you're that woman carrying the couch, it's a little bit of an identity crisis when they realize, I don't want to say that I'm falling apart or I need anything. And they don't even, it's not even a conscious thing. They're just like, it's fine. I can do it. And they've taken on so much, I don't realize they're carrying the couch.
Mm-hmm.
And then to realize this is what it feels like to be able to take a deep breath and relax and read a book for fun, or be on vacation and not be thinking about what I should be doing instead. It's really a great relief.
And I would imagine, I mean, for someone listening to this now, like for some of them, it might just feel like a giant chasm, right, from where they are now to being able to read a book and maybe say no to their kids or say not now to their partner for whatever, and to take that time for themselves. So how do you help them kind of bridge that gap with the work that you do? Are you still doing, does EMDR play a part of the work that you're doing with them?
Thank you for asking that. All of the advanced learning that I learned about through EMDR with nervous system regulation, I no longer think that is what I would recommend for anyone, because it's not just one incident. If it's one incident, it's tremendously helpful to go in and reprocess the information around that one incident.
Okay.
But for the vast majority of people, it is early conditioning that was many incidents, many things they don't remember, and it's just takes a very long time to get, go all through those. So what really helps is, and the women I work with much prefer 15 minutes a day of strategic implementation than years reprocessing past events that they already know and understand. And insight has a place, but it doesn't create the change. Like you having the aha moment about your father, those are really helpful insights, but they don't change the nervous system pattern. But if you can implement strategic steps in 15 minutes a day, you can habituate the nervous system. So anything that happens suddenly or a one-time thing, and we've all had that mountaintop moment at maybe a retreat or at a sermon or at a workshop or professional development, where like, aha, and this is the new understanding. But then what happens is within 36, 48 hours, we go back to our normal operating system. So unless you can have strategic steps to do it daily, you don't create those new neuro pathways in the brain. And so you've had an insight, but it's not your new norm. And then your brain prunes that and says, well, this doesn't fit for you. So people can call that self-sabotage. They can call it, just internal resistance. But really, you create new neural pathways the same way you plant a seed. You can plant it, but you're going to have to fertilize it, water. There's going to have to be conditions for it to grow. And that root system is going to have to be stabilized. And in the mind, it is the same way. And so when you do it that way, the mind starts releasing those past things. And then we can get to the deeper subconscious work once you get down and you can drop down and feel safe in the body. To your point about the EMDR, though, it's really important to do it in a trauma-informed way. Because if, let's say, there has been something where the person has never felt safe in their body, and you try to tell them to drop into their body and feel safe in their body, that alarm system processes, I think it's like 1 million bits of information per second. Our conscious brain can process 40 or something like that. So it fires so much more rapidly. So it really has to be done strategically so that you can release those old programs and have daily rhythms to support that new change.
Let's talk about safety for a minute, because it's a word that we've thrown around, and I think we're on the same page about it.
Right.
But I think sometimes when people hear safety, they get a little confused because they're like, oh, I'm safe. Got a nice house, locks at night, maybe some people got their gun cabinet, they whatever, like they're like, I'm not an immediate threat. There's not a bear that's trying to come get me. I'm not going to be hunted by a mountain lion right now. So everything is safe. So, when you guys are talking about feeling unsafe, like what is that? So can you sort of talk about maybe the different degrees of safety or how the body perceives it?
I'm so glad you asked that because, you get lost in kind of the lingo. And to your point, not only can people look around and say, I'm safe now, like, I've got a great job, I've got a great spouse, I've got problems, everybody has stressors, but things are good. But also people will say, well, that doesn't apply to me because I grew up in a 2-parent home and we always had our needs met and there were no traumas. So that really doesn't apply to me. And so again, while we don't need to go back in and like spend time reprocessing all the things that happen in childhood, I mean, no childhood is perfect, but safety, to your point, is early on when there is a lack of emotional attunement. That in and of itself is the greatest cause of a lack of emotional regulation throughout life. So there doesn't have to be abuse or neglect or something. It could be that a child grew up and their parent didn't have the language for emotional attunement. There's generational trauma. My own mother, her dad died tragically when she was 5. And so I can see that my mother, was the oldest daughter and did things to keep to help her mother, and, was the oldest sibling of 5. And so there can be things that happen, or someone has a parent who's struggling, or they lose a parent, or there's a sibling sick, or things didn't go well at school. But their internal emotional experiences, they didn't have someone who was able or available to really help them attune and manage the emotions or make sense of what was going on. And so they achieved a state of safety through, I get straight A's and I help out and mom really likes it when I'll do this. And so they get a lot of positive reinforcement. And so that lack of safety doesn't have to be physical, but it can be unsafe attuning to internal experiences. And then of course, other times there might have been traumas where it wasn't safe to process what was going on in the body. So it doesn't have to be physical safety, or lack of conditioning to have reflected back to me what's going on with you. Right.
So when you're talking about it, so it's like a little kid having a rough day and no parent is like checking in and be like, oh, hey, bud, looks like you're having a hard time. Like, what's going on? Is that what you're talking about with sort of emotional attunement?
Yes.
And so then that kid grows up and then that kid experiences other big emotions and it doesn't have the programming or the wherewithal to check into itself and be like, seems like I'm having a hard day. What's going on?
Right.
And so then they just kind of mask it with I grew up with my mom, she's a great woman, but literally said, if you're getting straight A's and you're not getting arrested, everything's fine.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, I can get straight A's, don't get arrested, and then I just sort of do what I want. But it was like, that was kind of the extent of like the emotional check-ins.
Right. So that conditioning of, okay, the teacher says I'm doing okay, and the law says I'm doing okay.
Yeah.
Therefore, I'm okay. Right. But let's say you didn't get picked on the field, or, you didn't get picked to be on a team at recess, or something's going on, or you're sad or upset, and someone notices and someone says, Jim, you seem a little quiet tonight. What's going on with you?
Yeah.
And then there's someone else mirroring back to you, I see you, you matter. Then you reflect on, oh, I am quiet tonight. What am I experiencing? So that the ability to reflect on my internal experience and then put that into words and express it and ask for what I need and receive comfort. A lot of times that just doesn't happen. And so there's been a lot of stuff suppressed because they just weren't conditioned to reflect on internal experiences and express it in a way that helped them to move through life being attuned to that. Instead, they were attuned to all of the external feedback that they were getting.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I've got Well, I'm just telling you all sorts of stories. Hope you don't mind.
I
had my grandmother was a Marine. Her husband was a Marine. So my grandparents on my dad's side were both Marines. And my grandfather died when my dad was like a teenager, and so left his mom to raise like 7 kids or 6 kids. And my aunt was very successful in business. She told this great story near the end of my grandmother's life. Grandmother was staying with my aunt. My aunt was at a lunch being sort of feted and celebrated for Businesswoman of the Year in Chicago, like won this big award. She, multi-million-dollar company, all these employees, like doing amazing stuff. She comes home and she's got like her little trophy and award, and she puts it down, and then grandmother's there. Grandmother's making cookies. And she says to my aunt, she goes, where's your flour sifter? First thing, she said, the woman comes home from being celebrated, and the first thing that my grandmother says to her is like, where's your flour sifter? And my aunt's like, I don't know. Like, I don't know if I have a flour sifter. And my grandmother looks at her and says, what kind of woman and mother doesn't have a flour sifter?
Oh my goodness.
And I love that story because it's so messed up, and it also like is everything. Like it says, like that story sort of captures everything that my dad went through, and like all of the things. So we talk about emotional attunement, like even emotional attunement for the good stuff, right? Mm-hmm. When they can't lock in on like, hey, congratulations, it seems like you had an awesome day,
right?
Right. That it's just like, what kind of woman doesn't have a flour sifter?
That's crazy. But it's such a great story because it seems like an extreme example, but the reality is that we are all living with some stories that maybe fit for previous generations,
okay,
and that no longer work, right? If your aunt is a successful businesswoman, she may love her family in all kinds of ways, but is the not having a flour sifter make her less loving, less feminine, and that is a struggle for, I think, a lot of working professional women. I know it has been for me, just because some templates I had from my mother worked in a different capacity. So I worked for part-time many years in my therapy practice, and I loved that balance. But there are some things that as you go on, you're comparing yourself to an old model and feeling less than without recognizing there's certain things that have changed, and that those stories aren't updated. Self-criticism. Like it sounds like your aunt was able to at least
she's able to laugh it off.
At least recognize, well, that's okay, and laugh it off and not go into shame, and recognize that her mother or grandmother, your grandmother had a different story about what it looked like. Mm-hmm. So, interesting. Great story.
Yeah. So like I love this conversation around safety and attunement. And when I hear you talk about your work, one of the things that I absolutely love about it is the intersection of faith with this like internal reprogramming and updating. And I would imagine that for a lot of your clients where, you're modeling safety, you're modeling that attunement for women of faith to be able to work with someone who has that faith focused, you're just creating this like amazing cradle of safety for them to explore what makes them tick in a way that's in alignment with their faith and their worship.
Thank you. I do. I mean, I've always been in private practice because I always wanted to be able to incorporate a Christian perspective. And as I learned more about the nervous system and all the EMDR and things, I just saw this intersection between how God has created our nervous system and our body. And I would see a lot of women coming in who they'd been doing Bible studies for years, and they had a strong faith, and they were just experiencing a lot of shame around, I know how I'm not supposed to fear, and I really do trust God. But then they would get messages like, well, maybe you just haven't really given it over to the Lord, or maybe are you really praying about it? And so they would feel not only trapped in it, but they would feel a lot of shame, and they would start questioning, I love the Lord and I don't know why. And so I do love that they would feel like they were the only ones. Again, kind of that shaming model of psychotherapy that like, I don't want anybody else to know. And I would want to say to them, I've had 5 other women today saying the exact same thing, who are amazing women. If you only knew them, like you would know how amazing that they are and how amazing you are. So I do love being able to combine the two, because they already have the faith piece. I don't do anything. I don't I don't need to do anything to perfect their faith or change their faith. But a lot of women tell us that as they're able to rest in their nervous system, they feel closer to the Lord than they ever have been. And that really moves me, because as a Christian, I do believe that's our purpose, is to, be here to bring glory to God. And I don't think any of us, when we are stressed out and depleted, are able to shine the light that we want to for others. And then also, one more thing is, like, the field of psychology is so, I think, has so many elements to that run counter to the Christian faith, that a lot of women have been concerned about not being influenced in a way that would feel out of alignment for them. So I think the things
Like
that work because God says it's true. So
yeah, what are some of the things in in modern psychotherapy that Christian women might have a problem with?
Well, I think the idea that every person has their own their own truth. And so as a Christian, I like to think, and I think most of my clients think, that the scripture is the truth. There is one way, but that we are all expressions of God in us. So you can look in nature, you can say that the beaches are beautiful, the mountains are beautiful, parts of the desert are beautiful, the Badlands are beautiful, but they're all very different, vastly different, but they all express God's glory. But in the field of psychology, wanting to say that there is no one truth really is a hard thing for Christians. And so I do believe, scripture is the one truth, and the women I work with are careful about that. Or they might hear meditation and think, well, that's Eastern, and but we know scripture says be still, and there's meditation is really, you can do Christian aligned, because you're choosing to focus on, right, what scripture tells us to meditate on, the things that are good and God's law. So I think just some things like that, and then just absorption with the self is another thing in modern psychology. Too much focus on me. And we know Christ laid down his life, for a holy purpose. And so getting them to understand, self-care is not selfish. You can do self-care in a way that gives you more of you to give, but from the place where your heart is in the right place. I think those are three things that really cause people to have some caution. And then also just the, let's slap you with a diagnosis. This is just anxiety, and give you a medication. I think that does not sit well for my clients. I don't believe that they believe that. That's not their identity.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially something I talk about on this podcast, as we work with I love talking to people that are getting to the root cause and, finding a different way. And one of the things that I think a lot of our practitioners are helping people to process is this kind of idea of, I call it medical hexing, where you get like hit with a label, and then they're just like, well, that's just who you are, and you're just going to have that forever. And it's like, I grew up Catholic, and it's like, I don't believe that that's what God has in store for me, is like to be that label forever.
No.
It's like, well, what about changing in faith, right, and, like divine intervention, and just,
right,
what happens is, as we can realign with, more trust, more faith, and just allowing the God-given body to do what it was created to do,
right,
and it's like, I feel like Western medicine in particular just eliminates all of that possibility and hope more often than not. I mean, I'll bear my one more often than not, it's like they're eliminating hope. They're putting people in a system, and, it's just kind of how it is. But, I think that, just the incorporation of faith is part of this work. It tickles something in me that's great. It makes you really happy that you're out there doing the work. And, it's really.
Oh, thanks. I do love that. And I just, we don't ever judge anyone by their faith. I just want to be transparent about who I am, so that when they come to work with me, they know that that's the lens I'm looking through. But your point about hope is, we all have ultimate hope, in Christ. If you're a Christian, you have ultimate hope. But but also we're here for a reason and that purpose. And like you said, I don't believe that. And I know my daughter had a severe head injury, and the Western medical is just like, well, she just has this and this and that. One doctor said to us, we had a lot of neurological testing, and they said, well, I think you should put her on antidepressant, because if she has to live like this much longer, she'll be depressed. And thought, no, I mean, I don't know. I appreciate, and I know everybody has a different perspective on that. And for those that it's worked for, and I know definitely there's a place for it, Western medicine, but we love getting to the root cause. And thankfully my husband was aligned in that way, and he practices functional medicine, but we were not content with that lack of hope. Like, she was 13. She's just going to not be able to move through life because of this. And I'm so thankful that and it's one of the things that made me want to expand my work, because we were dependent on finding experts and people who were willing to get to the root cause and willing to put themselves out there. My husband was listening to medical lectures and podcasts, and we went to people in many different states because we were determined to find answers. And we were praying, but we also desperately knew that God asked for our participation. And so we were desperately praying and knowing he could wipe it out just like that in any second. But I also trusted that he would also lead us to people, and just for people not to know that they're not alone, and that there are providers out there who look beyond diagnosis, labels, and medication.
It reminds me of that story of the flood is coming, and the guys, like, the cops come to the door like, hey, we're evacuating, the story, where, there's the guy's like, okay, we're evacuating. He's like, no, that's okay, God's going to save me. And then, waters are rising, the boat comes by, hey, let's go. I was like, no, that's okay, God's going to save me. He's on the roof, as the water is rising, the helicopter comes, hey, we're evacuating. No, God's going to save me. The guy ends up drowning and dying, meets God, and he's like, God, I was a faithful servant, why didn't you do something? It's like, I sent you a cop, sent you a boat, sent you a helicopter.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And like, and even, scripturally, how many times it says, be strong and courageous. And God sent people to foreign lands, and he asked them to move into new territories, and he asked them to leave the familiar. And there's such a strong theme in scripture about not going back to where you came from, to moving forward and trusting. And so, I always encourage people, whether they work with us or not, I always would say, like, this is, if nothing else, like, to have faith to move forward in something, and to know that this is not something that you just have to be stuck with. I mean, there are definitely things we have to accept in life, that things God isn't a genie in a bottle. There are things we have to go through, and that we do go through, and that help move us on our journey. But so it's not about thinking that we can control all things, but I don't believe a state of anxiety or burnout is a must for anyone.
Yeah. I've never thought about that courage to leave what's familiar, like, from the lens of the scripture, bring it back to the nervous system, right? Because that's really the work is like, what's familiar is overachieving, what's familiar is being overstretched, what's familiar is giving to everyone, is familiar is pleasing. And to really to do that next level of the calling on this planet, like the courage to do something different, the courage to leave what's familiar, is the courage to leave, like, and to shift, to get the new operating system, to click upgrade.
Right.
And that means I don't know. Maybe I don't know what this is going to feel like.
Yeah.
But, it's time.
And I might be a little bit, I hope this is accurate, but I think I recall from a sermon I heard that the Israelites wandering around in the desert took 40 years. It was really like a 2-week journey. Like, they stayed stuck in there. And then when they got to the promised land, they even though it had been promised to them, even though they had a path forward, they went in and they said, it's too scary. There's giants, only one. Joshua said, no, I think we can do it. And so because of that, they didn't move into it. And it is sad. I mean, most of the women we work with are determined to feel better. And when they know that it's time, it's time. But unfortunately, sometimes fear gets the best of people, and they think, well, they're just comfortable in that. And then, so, most of the women we work want to preserve their longevity and do what they can to be as capable as possible and to feel good. And they don't want to miss those meaningful moments. The name of my company is Joyful and Present. And when I was naming it, I thought, what do women that come to me want? And that was it. Like, they wanted to be joyful and present. But I think everybody desires that. It's more than desire. It's a commitment. If you recognize that that update is available, and those who want it are willing to take action to make that happen.
Amazing. This has been a great conversation. I've totally enjoyed it. Covered a lot of ground.
Me too. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, kind of a final thought here of like, so imagine that this woman is watching this conversation, and she's, maybe feeling a little reluctant, or is thinking, well, like, I'll just wait a little bit longer. Time will fix this, and it'll just kind of get better on its own. Do you have anything that you would want to say to her?
Well, again, it doesn't always have to be trauma, but I'm just going to take something from Bessel van der Kolk, because he is the leading trauma expert in the world. And he says, I think he says in his book, like, the ultimate resolution to trauma is to return a person to feeling safe in the body. And the research really clearly suggests that time, talk, and medication does not fix this. And so the idea that time is going to help, that's just not supported by research. Nervous system dysregulation operates in the autonomic nervous system. So the longer it goes on, the bigger the toll it takes on the body. And so, it's just, I know that's a hope. Like, if I just keep pushing through a little bit longer, but the weight of that on the nervous system and the body, the problem you fix today is less than the problem you fix a year from now. And so I always encourage women, when you recognize it's time, this is the best time.
Yeah. Amazing. And so for that woman who recognizes it's time, how can she get in touch with you? How can she follow you?
Well, I'm on YouTube. I'm on Facebook. She could listen to my masterclass. I have a masterclass that kind of explains the underlying cause of my approach. Some of what we've talked about today, some that might be a little bit different. And my company is Joyful and Present. So
amazing. Thank you so much for being here. Be sure to check her out. Appreciate your time. We'll see you guys next time.
Thank you, Jim.